Superman is directed by James Gunn and stars David Cornsweet, Rachel Brosnahan, and among others. And in this story, it deals where Superman has already been around for 3 years in this reboot of what's called the DC universe, where Superman has to prove to the world that he's a good person after some corruption goes down with Lex Luthor turning the world against him. And it pretty much is straightforward from there, along with some other stuff that involves with the Justice Gang, as they're called, that get involved with trying to help Superman out with various entities that they come across. Now, here's some backstory. Now, this movie was directed by James Gunn, who I've been an avid fan of a lot of the films he's done in the past, especially when his turn during Marvel, when he was doing movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. And I also really enjoyed his Suicide Squad from a few years ago, and ever since the growing up, Superman was always one of those kind of characters that, to me, I was always secondary as far as my favorite DC superheroes, because Batman was always my go-to. Because even when I was a kid, Superman was always just one that I preferred, that I always had Batman over, but I still always respected Superman a lot. And there was a lot of different forms of media that I grew up with Superman, including the animated series from the 90s, which I really loved. And then I kind of got the late start when it came to the movies, because while I've seen bits and pieces of the first two original Richard Donner films, I didn't really get to watch them in entirety until actually just recently. And so I really loved the first two movies after finally seeing them. And it really wasn't until Man of Steel came out that I actually got myself involved with Superman more, because me growing up reading some comics and stuff, it was just one of those things where I always preferred Batman and even other DC characters compared to Superman, because Superman I always felt like was just too invincible all the time. It wasn't really until Man of Steel came out that it brought Superman into the limelight for me, to where I was able to feel it a lot more on a relatable level, so to speak. And it was showing a more grounded side to Superman that I really enjoyed. And for better or worse, I feel like that was actually a good change of what they did as a start. And even though I didn't mind some of the films in the DC Extended Universe what we had, I did feel like we could have seen more of its potential had we seen Henry Cavill, play more in the future with like actual sequels to Man of Steel. Because as much as I do enjoy some of the other films in that universe, even I can admit that was definitely a flawed universe, and it almost seemed like it really could have done a lot better. And so, since that universe pretty much is now no longer happening, and we are now in a new reboot, seeing what James Gunn was pretty much going to be doing now with the franchise, it got me really curious, because coming from the trailers, it made it seem like they were going back to more the upbeat type of Richard Donner universe that we had from the original films. And you could definitely tell from the trailers that they were getting that vibe, while also mixing in with the other type of comic book feel that we see in various forms of what we would. And it was even giving me vibes of the animated series in a good way. And so, after seeing it, I can say that this was everything I really wanted to see out of Superman. And I'll be honest, this is definitely one of the best Superman films I've seen in years. Now, keep in mind that I still prefer the original Richard Donner films, the first two, and even to some extent, I'll at least give Man of Steel on a couple things that it did more. But for everything that I love with Superman, I think was just really great did it really top notch with this one, and was able to accomplish everything that I love with, not only for the character, but also setting up this new universe that we're seeing now going forward. And so, to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were all phenomenal. David Cornsweet, I've only seen him in a couple other things with Pearl and Twisters and stuff, and I think that he really not only nailed Superman, but he just really carried it all. Like, he really gave it his best, he really gave it his all, and I really enjoy him as Clark as well. And I'll get into a minor thing about that, because we don't really get to see him much as Clark, but for Superman, he really knocks it out of the park, and I'm glad to see that, he really did his homework on the character and stuff. And while I still also really enjoy Henry Cavill, and I really don't want to compare both of them, they both work in their own way, and I think that David really pulled it off, and he was just such a tremendous joy to watch. And the chemistry with him and Rachel, what I thought was outstanding in this. Rachel really did a fantastic job as Lois Lane, and it was also giving me some kind of vibes that what we got from the original Richard Donner universe, with in some ways with Margaret Kidder. In a good way, but she really did her own thing where she wasn't trying to copy that, and I think it worked to its advantage. And the rest of the cast is also great too. You also have Nicholas Hoult playing Lex Luthor, and finally, after so long, we have a great Lex Luthor. I really not only enjoyed the intimidation that he does, but also I just really love the fact that he's just really out there to really fuck with Superman and trying to get the world to turn on its side. Because this is everything that I wanted to see out of Jesse that we could have got from a different actor playing in the DC Extended Universe. Because Jesse Eisenberg, to me, is one of the worst examples of what you don't do with Lex Luthor. And, you know, even though we had the campy side with Gene Hackman, I still really love Gene Hackman in the original films. But I'm glad to see that they took a more different approach with, you know, with this one, where he does have that very hateful side, but he also has that very more kind of grounded, very, you know, business-like type approach that was very akin to the animated series. In fact, I think the biggest comparison for this one could honestly be like a live-action version of the animated series, and how they also do a lot of crossovers in that show too, where you get to see a lot of various heroes and villains come into play in this, because when they bring in the Justice Gang in this, I can definitely see the complaints that some people had as far as it being overstuffed and everything. But honestly, that didn't really bother me too much, because if anything, it was because we already get from the get-go that Superman's already been around for the last 3 years and in text form. And I know that's kind of a cheap way to not doing the origin, but you know what? At this point, it's like, how much more are you going to keep doing the same stuff over and over again? And the way they pull it off with bringing the characters into play, they do a good job, I think, with the exposition, with at least knowing who the characters are and everything, because it doesn't feel like it's very forced like it was with, even I would admit it was forced in Batman vs. Superman with trying to bring in some of the other characters. You know, there's a good way that they play it into context with the story. And also the story that's involved where Lex is having to turn the world against Superman was not only very, you know, it was gripping, but it was also able to put the stakes very high. But I also appreciate the social commentary that the movie is also going for about, you know, Superman having to prove to the world of being a good person and everything in a very meaningful way that I really bought. What can I say about the score? You know, it's great to hear not only the very iconic John Williams score coming back again, theme coming from the original films, and I know that that's kind of been a cheap way for them not to use the actual new version of Superman's theme, because in Man of Steel we did get that badass music from Hans Zimmer. But I do really seem like for this type of Superman, I'm glad at least they kept the essence of it, and it didn't bother me, because I think that the John Williams music, I think, just goes so great, and it has made such a long impression that I'm glad to see it being used again to its advantage. And it was just great to hear. On top of that, I really got to enjoy the rest of the score as well in the film. It was especially hearing like the intentional music that plays and that rocking soundtrack that you hear later on in the film. I thought was amazing. And the biggest thing I have to miss the most is definitely the flight sequences. Like, this movie doesn't hold back on its action with a lot of, you know, Superman flying around, you know, punching bad guys and stuff. And seeing it in IMAX was such a great experience, especially seeing it in 3D and everything, where if I felt it very immersed in it with the atmosphere. And the cinematography was very breathtaking, especially when we get to see the Fortress of Solitude and the city, the way it's captured and all that. And I also really enjoyed the humor in this, because I was actually laughing quite throughout. In fact, one of the biggest laugh-out moments I had was this part that involves where Mr. Terrific is, you know, fighting these other guys and stuff. And I thought it was not only a great action sequences, but it reminded me a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 with that whole, like, whistle thing that Yondu uses and all that. But I'll leave it at there. Like, I think that the humor really works well with that James Gunn type of way. It really worked to its fault. And while there may have been a couple scenes where maybe we could have toned it down a little at times, it didn't really bother me, because I was still smiling throughout, and it gave me everything I really wanted to see out of it. And there's also some great emotional beats that we see later on in the film that shows the downfall, what happens with Superman and what he has to prove to the world and everything. And the way and how it plays into Ma and Pa Kent was also really great too. And what can I say? You know, Krypto was just also a great addition as well, being very cute and everything, and him running around and stuff and beating up bad guys and all that. Now, if I had to get into kind of minor cons, I will have to say that it could have been nice to see a little bit more of Clark Kent when he's at Daily Planet and stuff. And this movie was kind of going with the approach like we have the Batman a few years ago, where it's more about the superhero than it is the alternate than the secret identity and stuff. But it didn't bother me, I guess, too much, because we still see the presence of Clark throughout the film, especially when he's not wearing the iconic glasses and stuff. So I still bought it, but it would have been nice to at least have more scenes with him, you know, doing his whole journalism and all that. But maybe they're probably saving that up for the next one, you know, kind of what we did, kind of similar to what we got with Bruce Wayne in the Batman movie recently. So that's just one of my that did kind of throw me. That was kind of a minor thing I had, but it didn't hurt the movie or anything for me. And on top of that, there is some questionable CGI, like we see in a lot of these superhero films, that do feel a little, you know, janky at times in certain parts. But it was rendered to the point to where I didn't really mind it so much, so I still bought it. But overall, though, like, I still had such a blast with this movie, and finally, it's great to see that DC, I feel like, is back on track with, giving us great movies again, like they have been with the recent Batman movie and stuff. And so with that, I'm definitely looking forward to see what they do next, and I'm going to give the movie a phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. So, for those of you who have also seen Superman, let me know in the comments what you thought about it, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.